How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Discover Politics. I'm going to be your host today. My name is Kyle Obrien, and today I'd like to start this new channel off with a very important lesson or discussion. As a matter of fact, I think that the topic for today's video is probably one of the most important facets to the freedoms that we have as citizens of the United States of America. And it's a big part of the reason that I can make this video, as well as write articles that I've written or make the other videos that I make on my other YouTube channel. What we're going to be talking about is the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, you can hear in the actual wording of this amendment that it covers some of our most important and most highly touted freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of religion. These are things that I'm sure everybody has heard about many times living here in the United States. And it's these three aspects of the First Amendment that I honestly feel are a big part of the reason that this was the very first amendment written. And a lot of that has to do with the history of the Founding Fathers and the issues that they had with the government that they had just left. So let's talk about these three more well-known aspects of the First Amendment to begin with. Starting with freedom of religion. See, a lot of people may not realize this, but a big part of the people who came to America as colonists from England and other parts of Europe actually came to flee religious persecution. In England, they had a thing called the Church of England. And the Church of England was actually founded by an English king at one point in history so that he could issue his own divorce edict because the Pope didn't want to do it. Because of this, and because England had a state-run church, people of other Christian denominations and non-Christian beliefs were not treated as well in England at the time as they really deserved to be. And as a result of that, they came to the New World seeking a place where they could be free to practice and believe as they wished. It's for this reason that freedom of religion was so important to the Founding Fathers, because they did not want to create a situation where further on in history, people would end up controlling the United States of America who would repeat the problems that a lot of Americans, early Americans, had fled when they came here from England and other parts of Europe. Additionally, at that point, certain problems with the politicization, the politics of the Catholic Church had also been a much more recent memory for the Founding Fathers than they are for us. And I think that another big reason that this freedom needed to be established in their minds was to avoid that type of political control coming into the hands of any one religion. because when one religion gains that type of political control, followers of other religions start to face persecution and can lose freedoms and rights in an unfair way. So it's for this reason that the Founding Fathers put the freedom of religion clause in the First Amendment. To go on to the second of these three more well-known aspects of the First Amendment, we have freedom of speech. And this is going to be a trend that you see really in most aspects of the First Amendment and in all the early amendments, what you would call the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, is that this also had a lot to do with the problems that the Founding Fathers and most Americans had with the royalty, the king in England, and the people that were in charge there. Because before the creation of America, it was pretty much unheard of to have a country where a common citizen could speak out against the government and complain about the government without facing any sort of legal consequences, either being jailed or tortured or perhaps even executed. And this, again, is something that the Founding Fathers really thought was wrong. And it's for this reason that they made sure to establish in the Bill of Rights that people had the right to speak out against anything that they found abhorrent or had a problem with. Now, a lot of people in modern day kind of lose sight of this, because sometimes people can use the freedom of speech to say really, really atrocious things. But it's very important to remember that we should legally allow people to say those things. Because the same right that they have to say those terrible things is the same right that allows us to speak out against them. And if we take that right away, even if we do it with good intentions, if we say, all right, you can't say anything mean about any other group of people, even if we do this with good intentions, we have to face that further down the road, our children or our children's children may not live in an America that is controlled by people whose intentions are as good as ours were. And now that that freedom to speak out against things that are wrong or evil is taken away, even if it is done with the intent that we want to, keep people's feelings from getting hurt or something like that, there is the possibility that if the wrong person ends up in power later on down the road, they can now use that lack of freedom to oppress future generations. And that's why it's very important that even if we don't like something that somebody is saying, we always defend their right to say it. And that is also why the Founding Fathers added freedom of speech as part of the very first amendment to the United States Constitution. Now, the next part, in my opinion, ties in very closely to freedom of speech, and that is freedom of the press. The thing is that throughout history, and even today, in countries that have oppressive leadership, oppressive dictatorships, authoritarian governments, and the like, one of the greatest ways that they control the public is by controlling the press. Because the press is how we get information to the public. So take North Korea, for example. One of the biggest problems that citizens in North Korea face when it comes to trying to get out from under the boot heel of a very oppressive government is the fact that all media and all information that reaches the public is controlled by the government. They do not have a freedom of the press. So they are told things like that the leader of North Korea invented hamburgers to help feed all the hungry North Koreans. And silly things like that. The thing is that none of that is true. But because they lack a freedom of the press, they do not have that information. And because they do not have the information, they do not know what the real problems facing their country are. And in this way, the government can use their control of the press to disseminate incorrect information to the populace and make it seem as though all the problems that they face are really the result of outside influences and not the government's corruption and mistreatment of its own citizens. This is something the Founding Fathers knew quite well, because at the time that America was founded, that was simply the way things were done. All countries that existed, at least in Europe at that time, were monarchies. And in all situations, a paper or, town crier was not allowed to say anything that was negative about the king or, the lord that controlled the area or any other aspect of the government. And if they were to do so, it could be severely punishable, by imprisonment or worse. So I think that is a big part of why, when America was established, the Founding Fathers thought it was so important to make sure that they guaranteed we would always have a free press. You quite often see nowadays stories in the news speaking out against the president or a governor or a congressman who has done something wrong. And the reason that they're allowed to do this is the fact that we have this First Amendment and this freedom of the press, which this amendment guarantees. And because we are able to get that information and we are able to see opinions that contradict our government, as well as hear when people in the government have done something wrong, we are able to have all the information to know when the government needs to be held accountable by the people. And that is really where the more obscure aspects of the First Amendment come in. And that's what we're going to talk about now. See, the two less spoken of aspects of the First Amendment are the people's right to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, these two things quite literally go hand in hand, and they were, I believe, intended to do exactly that, because combined, these two rights, these two freedoms, allow us as the people to hold the government accountable for their actions. See, first let's look at the right of the people to peaceably assemble. Now, most of you probably remember there were parades and demonstrations against the inauguration of President Trump when he became president of the United States. Now, the reason that people are allowed to do that is because of this part of the First Amendment, the people's right to peaceably assemble. Now, the key is peaceably. when those assemblies turn violent, if they start to do harm to people or damage property, they are no longer lawful assemblies. But as long as people remain peaceful, hold signs, chant, they can do whatever they want. They are allowed to show their displeasure in the government. Now, another aspect of those Trump anti-inauguration rallies that I think is interesting to discuss is the fact that I don't really believe that they fall into the intended purpose of the freedom to peaceably assemble. And here's why. Because by protesting the inauguration of a president, you're actually protesting the decision of the voting public. And in that sense, you're not actually assembling to express your grievances of the government, but of other citizens, other voters, who made a decision that goes against the one that you would have wanted. Now, in no way does this make this illegal or unlawful, but I think it's important to make the distinction that that is not exactly the type of thing that this part of the amendment was written for. Now, quite to the contrary, we can look at the protests of the Vietnam War, which are pretty much exactly what this type of, or this part of the amendment was written for. See, at that time, the government of the United States of America was continuing to spend lives and resources on a war that a good portion of the population did not think that we should be participating in. And they used this freedom to peaceably assemble to demonstrate and show the government how unhappy they were with their actions. You see, they were actually protesting the actions of the government. And historically, prior to the creation of America, in the world that our founding fathers would have grown up in, if you were to have that type of protest, if you were to gather outside the king's palace and protest something he has done, quite often what would happen is that the military or constabulary or town watch would be called in, and they would disperse the crowd, often by force. And in these situations, people could be outright killed, or seriously harmed, imprisoned, or just forced to flee. And by allowing people to gather and express their displeasure with decisions that the government makes, it allows the people of the United States to hold the government accountable for their actions. And that is why this aspect of the First Amendment exists and why it's so important. But see, it goes hand in hand with the next thing that, and last part of the amendment, which is the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, the wording of this can be a little bit confusing, and if you don't really look into it, it may not be clear exactly what is meant when it says the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. But actually what this means is that you have the right to take the government to court, essentially, and demand a change or a repayment for some wrong that you feel the government has done. Now, you can see how this correlates with the first, or the last thing we talked about, which is the people's right to peaceably assemble. These are both tools of the American people to hold the government accountable. As to where the first three parts of the amendment allow us the freedom to express our own beliefs and to disseminate information freely so that we understand the details and nuances behind the situations and know when the government needs to be held accountable. These last two parts allow us to actually hold the government accountable when it needs to be done. Now, for example, some examples of this right being implemented would be a lot of key Supreme Court decisions, where somebody feels that a current existing law is unjust, and they take that through the court system to cause that law to be changed, and sometimes even to sue the government for damages that have been caused by this unjust law, if the Supreme Court does find that the law is, in fact, unconstitutional. A very recent example of this is the case of a rock band made up entirely of Asian Americans who called themselves the Slants. Now, a 1954 law, I believe it was 1954, don't quote me on that, but an existing law created a rule that you could not copyright and trademark things that could be derogatory towards certain groups. And the term slants can actually be used as a derogatory term for Asian people. However, these individuals felt that by stopping them from copywriting or trademarking that name, the government was actually stopping them from reappropriating something back to their culture which had been used against them historically. And in fact, the Supreme Court decided this week that they were right, and they took away that old law and changed it in their favor so that they can now copyright and trademark their brand name and logo. There have been other examples in the past where members of the military have been put in certain situations that they believe cause them permanent harm and have sued the government, such as people who served on certain United States aircraft carriers during the tsunami in Japan, who believed that they were exposed to excessive levels of radiation. And as a response to that, they believed that that was putting them in harm's way for no reason, and doing bodily harm to them that they didn't deserve. So they are actually able to go sue the government and try and recover money from that instance. And now, at the point when it reaches the Supreme Court can either decide that, yes, the Constitution and the laws and precedents of this country allows you to be put in this situation, and therefore you're not going to get any money. Or they could decide, no, the Constitution and the laws of this country do not allow the government to put its military members in harm's way in this manner, and therefore you deserve X amount of money from the government. Now, with this, we can use this tool, the legal system of the United States of America, to actually hold politicians and members of our government accountable when they do something that we feel is wrong, or that goes against pre-existing laws or the Constitution itself. So, I think that now that we've gone over every aspect of the First Amendment, we can really understand what it is that the Founding Fathers were trying to create when they wrote this amendment. And I think that for as short as it is, it does a lot, and it's very well constructed and thought out. And it allows people, it stops, major religious entities, some of which have even been run by the government themselves in the past, from gaining too much political influence and oppressing followers of other faiths. It allows us to speak our minds regardless of if we are in favor of or in opposition to the decisions of the government. It allows the press to spread information to the people so they know what's really going on in the world and what the real causes of problems they may be facing are. And with these first three parts, we assure a free society where we always know what our government is doing, and we are allowed to form our own opinions on whether or not those actions are correct and justifiable. Now, the last two aspects are the tools that we are given to enforce those beliefs on the government and to hold the government accountable for the actions that it takes by either assembling and showing our representatives in the government our displeasure at their actions, or by actually taking legal action against the government to force a change in unjust laws, or to seek restitution and damages for unjust things that have been done by our government. I absolutely believe that this, combined with one or two other amendments, which I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to do videos on every single amendment as this channel goes on, are some of the most important amendments at upholding our freedoms as Americans here in this country. And I'm really glad that the First Amendment exists. I don't think that we could have this free and fair country otherwise. I think that if the Founding Fathers had forgotten to create these freedoms that are in the First Amendment, America would be a much, much different place now. And I don't think it would have been as successful or maintained the constant level of freedom that it has. And really has only, the freedoms of our country have only increased over time and not decreased. Because at the end of the day, even though sometimes people, even meaning well, have some really bad ideas, the popular opinion and the wisdom of the general public is always able to win out because of the First Amendment. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be linking some, extra reading from various websites where you can learn more about the topic of today's video. And I am going to be putting out, for the time being, 2 videos a week on this channel. And just so everybody knows, if you're coming here from my other channel, the content on this channel is not going to be politically oriented. I'm not, talking about topics of debate or covering current events or things like that. That is all going to stay on my original channel. This is entirely intended to be educational content. So if that's what you're looking for, you are in the right place. If you're looking for more current events or, debate oriented content, then you're going to want to go over to my other channel and check that out. Also, this is going to be more the family friendly type content that is not so much on my other channel, because those can be quite sensitive topics that do upset people. And also, on this channel, I'm going to make it a point to not include any profanity or anything like that, which is not something I do on my other channel. Anyway, you guys have a great day. I will see you in the next video. Have a great night.